Follow Moonlit Romance Library for more moonlit romances. At moonrise, on the old stone platform above Greyfin Manor, Aldrich Vale lifted his silver cup before the entire pack and announced that Clara Whitmore had no Luna presence. The words should have wounded her more neatly. They should have split her open in some graceful, tragic way, the sort of wound ladies in ballads received while wearing pearls and looking conveniently pale. Instead, Clara looked down at the enormous white goose tucked beneath her arm. The goose looked back with round black eyes, an orange beak, a little crescent of silver feathers under its throat, and the unforgiving expression of a bishop who had discovered soup where wine should be. Then the goose hissed. It was not a small hiss. It was the kind of hiss that caused 3 armed men to remember urgent business behind someone taller. Lady Seraphine, who had been sitting in the Luna chair already, smiled with her chin tilted high and one hand resting on the pearl shawl around her shoulders. The shawl had been meant to glitter in the moonlight. It did glitter, right up until the goose launched from Clara's arms like a feathered siege engine and clamped its beak around the pearls. The entire pack froze. Seraphine squealed. The goose planted both orange feet on the platform and leaned backward with the grim devotion of a creature pulling sin out of a drain. Pearls snapped. Silver beads flew. One landed in Aldrich's cup with a delicate plink. Clara, who had spent 19 years learning how not to laugh at funerals, failed completely. It came out as a cough at first, then as a strangled little sound she tried to bury in her sleeve. The sound shook through her ribs where Aldrich's words had struck. No Luna presence. No noble bearing. No ancient blood shining in her. Not enough wolf in her walk. Not enough obedience in her eyes. Not enough quiet in her mouth. Aldrich's face reddened beneath his careful blonde curls. He was handsome in the polished way of a coin that had never bought bread. The moon washed him silver. The crowd watched him as if his next breath might decide winter. He had decided it, or thought he had. He set down the cup and spoke louder. Clara Whitmore is rejected from my side. She may remain in Greyfin as a kitchen mistress, for she has always been suited to low matters. The kitchen women below the platform did not bow their heads. Clara noticed that first. Not Aldrich's mother turning away. Not the elders nodding as if kindness had been done. Not Seraphine clutching half a shawl around herself while the goose chewed the other half with thoughtful concentration. She noticed Bess from the bakehouse, with flour still on her elbows. She noticed Maud Reed, the head laundress, short, square, scarred from hot water, her arms folded like a closed gate. She noticed little Nella from St. Bridget's orphan room, standing on a rain barrel so she could see over the adults, holding up the wooden spoon Clara had carved for her last winter. Clara's throat tightened. She had known the noble families would not defend her. She had known, from the moment she heard Aldrich laughing in the council corridor that morning, that the rejection had been prepared like a feast. She had even known that Seraphine would wear the pearls Clara had mended, because cruelty enjoyed costume changes. But she had not known that the people below the platform would look as if they had been rejected too. Aldrich lifted his hand toward the manor stairs. Take her away. 2 guards moved. The goose dropped the shawl and charged. The first guard made the mistake of thinking the creature ordinary. He put 1 boot forward. The goose seized the leather lace and twisted. The guard hopped, yelped, lost balance, and sat down hard in the decorative bowl of moonlit rose petals arranged for Aldrich's noble announcement. Petals flew up around him like a very embarrassed blessing. The second guard paused. Clara stepped off the platform by herself. Her pale blue gown was not grand enough for a Luna's ceremony. Aldrich's mother had said that in the dressing room, pinching the sleeve between 2 fingers. Clara had chosen it anyway, because it had a clean shape, a narrow waist, and long floating skirts that moved well when she walked. Her long blonde hair fell below her hips in a heavy braid threaded with little moonstones borrowed from the chapel, because nobody could stop a rejected woman from borrowing from God. She reached the lower stones and turned once. You are generous, she said to Aldrich. His mouth tightened, unsure whether she was thanking him. Clara gave him her softest smile. It was a very dangerous smile. The kitchen girls called it the pudding smile, because it appeared just before she served someone exactly what he deserved. A kitchen mistress, she added, would know how to keep grain from rotting in a locked storehouse. I wish you every success without one. A few people gasped. One of the elders said, Mind your tongue. Clara looked at the elder's belly, then at the wine stains on his robe. I have been minding it for years, my lord. That may have been where we all went wrong. The goose honked so violently that it sounded like agreement. Then Clara walked away. She expected silence behind her. Perhaps whispers. Perhaps Seraphine's angry tears. Instead, she heard footsteps. At first only 2 sets. Then many. Boots, clogs, bare soles, the slap of wet laundry shoes, the shuffle of old men from the smokehouse, the patter of children trying not to run. Clara looked back when she reached the gate. The kitchen women were following her. So were the washerwomen, the dairy girls, 3 shepherd widows, the chapel nurse, the boys from the orphan loft, the girls who slept above the bakehouse, Tomas the Shy Mill steward with his ink book hugged to his chest, and old Mistress Vale's seamstress, who looked terrified and delighted at once. Maud walked at the front, carrying a copper pot in one hand as if it were a royal standard. Bess had 2 loaves tucked under her arms. Nella dragged a sack twice her size and wore a grin that showed 1 missing tooth. The goose waddled ahead of them all, still trailing a piece of Seraphine's pearl shawl from its beak. Behind Clara, Aldrich shouted her name. He sounded furious. He sounded surprised. He sounded, Clara thought with a pinch of savage pleasure, like a man who had tossed away a candle and accidentally learned the whole house had been using it to see. No one stopped at the gate. No one asked permission. Clara walked into the moonlit road beyond Greyfin Manor with a rejected bond in her chest, a furious goose at her feet, and half the people who knew how to keep a pack alive following behind her. That was the first night anyone called it rebellion. Clara called it supper because everyone was hungry. They reached the old tithing barn by midnight. It stood beyond the manor fields, long abandoned since the western roof had sagged and the nobles decided the road was too muddy for their boots. Clara had played there as a child whenever she was meant to be learning noble embroidery. She remembered the dry corner beneath the hayloft, the stone oven outside, and the small spring behind the wall where mint grew in a stubborn green patch even after frost. By the time the moon climbed high, the barn had firelight, bread, wash water, 3 blankets, and 47 opinions. "We cannot stay," said one widow. "We cannot go back," said Maud. "We can stay until dawn," said Clara, which was the only truth she could afford. The goose marched around the room, inspecting ankles. It was not, strictly speaking, her goose. She had met it 6 months earlier in the marsh beyond St. Brigid's orphan room, on a day when rain came sideways and Aldrich had forgotten to send the children's oats again. Clara had gone herself with a wicker basket and returned by the low path to avoid the elder, who disliked seeing noble, betrothed women carrying food. She had found the goose standing in the middle of the flooded track, white feathers plastered smooth, orange beak clamped around the hem of a trapper's cloak. The trapper had been twice Clara's width and half her conscience. "Mad bird," he had shouted, waving a snare pole. Clara had set down the oats and said, "Sir, if you have quarreled with a goose and lost, I would not advertise it." The goose had glanced at her. The trapper had lunged. Clara had lifted the oat basket and hit him under the chin with the bottom of it. The basket broke. Oats went everywhere. The goose released the cloak, seized the trapper's boot, and flapped with astonishing purpose. Between them, woman and goose drove the trapper into the marsh, where he sat in black mud and made noises no ballad would preserve. Only afterward did Clara see the thin wire caught around the goose's left wing. She had expected to be bitten when she touched it. Instead, the goose went still, trembling under its wet feathers, and let her cut the wire away with her little belt knife. Beneath the wire was a gray scar, and under the throat, the strange silver crescent that no farm goose bore. "You are not a normal goose," Clara had whispered. The goose blinked. "That is rude of me," she said. "I apologize. I am not always a normal lady." The goose had followed her home. It slept in flour bins, chased men who lied near doorways, stole shiny buttons, and refused every name except one. Clara called it honor, after the thing people always praised in speeches and neglected in kitchens. Honor accepted the name by biting Aldrich's riding glove in half. Now Honor climbed onto a broken stool in the tithing barn and tucked one orange foot under its white belly. It looked at Clara as if waiting for her to become sensible. Clara wanted to sit down. She wanted to cry once, perhaps into a flour sack, then wash her face before anyone saw. She wanted to know why rejection felt less like losing Aldrich and more like losing the last polite excuse for staying where she had been shrinking for years. Instead, she put water on to boil. "Children first," she said. "Then anyone older than Master Hugh. Then anyone who carried someone else's bundle." "That is a Luna order," Bess said. The barn went quiet. Clara looked at the fire. "I'm not Luna tonight." Maud set down the copper pot with a clang. "You were more Luna when you handed out winter socks than Seraphine looked sitting in that chair." "Seraphine is not the whole wrong of it," Clara said. Maud snorted. "She wore your pearls. They were the manor's pearls. You mended them. Then I hope she enjoys the half still attached to her." Nella giggled so hard she hiccuped. Clara allowed herself one breath of laughter. It steadied her more than dignity would have. At dawn, riders came from Grayfin. Aldrich did not come himself. He sent Elder Rowan, whose beard had 3 braids and whose mercy had none. Rowan stood outside the barn with 6 guards and a parchment bearing the manor seal. Clara Whitmore, he called. By order of Alpha Aldrich Vale, all servants and dependents of Grayfin Manor are to return before the second bell. Any who remain with you will lose ration rights, cottage rights, and burial rights. The children pressed close to the barn doors. Clara felt the room's fear move like cold water. The pack controlled grain, work, roofs, graves, even the right to be mourned in the chapel yard. She stepped outside before anyone could see her hands shake. Honor waddled after her. The elder read the parchment again, louder, because men with weak arguments enjoyed volume. When he finished, Clara said, "Elder Rowan, how much grain remains in the east storehouse?" He frowned. "That is not your concern. It became my concern every time a child fainted in chapel. You are rejected." From Aldrich's side, Clara said. "Not from arithmetic." Tomas, standing behind her, made a tiny please sound and opened his ink book. Elder Rowan lifted his chin. "The mill is closed to you. Grayfin grain is closed to you. If you lead these people away from lawful authority, you will answer before the king." At the word king, several people crossed themselves. The Border Alpha King was not a bedtime tale, though some mothers used his name when children played with knives. King Rowan Thorn ruled the northern passes from Blackmere Keep, where storms broke against the towers and enemy packs came away fewer than they arrived. People said he was so handsome that candles burned straighter when he entered a hall. They also said he had once silenced a council by setting one hand on the table and letting his wolf look through his eyes. Clara had never seen him. She had no wish to explain 40 hungry dependents and 1 goose to a war king, so she smiled at Elder Rowan instead. "If the king asks, I will tell him you threatened children with unmarked graves because a goose disliked your ceremony." The guards shifted. Elder Rowan's beard braids trembled. Honor chose that moment to walk between his boots, look up and honk into his robe. One of the guards laughed. Rowan struck him with a glare, then turned his horse sharply enough that mud splashed his own hem. "You have until sundown to repent." "Lovely," Clara called. "Bring back the pearl shawl. Honor may want dessert." Maud wheezed behind her. Bess had to sit on a stump. The laughter did not erase the danger, but it changed the shape of it. Fear became something they could hold together. By noon, Clara had a list. She had always liked lists. Noble women were supposed to like roses, ribbons, and compliments that made them smaller. Clara liked lists because hunger could become numbers, numbers could become work, and work could become bread. Tomas knew the old South Mill. His father had kept it before the manor closed it to force everyone through Grayfin's toll. The wheel was cracked, the roof leaked, and the grain chute had been chewed by mice, but the stream still ran strong. "If we fix it," Tomas said, blushing because everyone was looking at him, "we can grind any grain bought or gathered outside Vale land." "In theory." "In practice?" Clara asked. "In practice, I will need 3 good beams, 2 iron bands, 1 new axle pin, and someone brave enough to remove a badger from the meal room." Honor lifted its head. "No," Clara told the goose. Honor hissed. "We are not sending you into a badger negotiation. Last time you negotiated with a terrier, the priest had to climb a tree." Nella whispered, "I liked that day." They went to the South Mill in a procession that would later become legend and, at the time, looked like laundry escaping. Clara carried tools. Maud carried rope. Bess carried bread dough wrapped in cloth. The widows carried knives hidden under aprons. The children carried everything they could lift, including 1 bucket that leaked so faithfully it watered the road behind them. When they reached the mill, Clara's heart sank. It was worse than Tomas had remembered. The wheel hung like a broken shoulder. The door sagged. Ivy swallowed half the wall. Inside, stale dust lay thick enough to write accusations in. Nella walked to a window, wiped a circle, and peered out at the stream. "Can a place be sad?" she asked. "Yes," Clara said. "But sometimes it is only waiting for someone impolite enough to wake it." The badger was not in the meal room. It was in the pantry, offended by visitors. For 10 minutes, the South Mill held more screaming than a battlefield and less strategy than a wedding dance. Maud climbed onto a barrel. Tomas shut himself in the flour cupboard by mistake. Bess tried to lure the badger with honey cake while Nella provided commentary from the stairs. Honor waddled in, stared at the badger, and spread its wings. The badger stared back. Two ancient tempers measured one another. Then Honor let out a honk so deep it seemed to come from the millstones themselves. The badger left. It walked out the door with dignity, looked once over its shoulder as if it would be writing to someone, and disappeared into the bracken. Maud climbed down from the barrel. I will never speak against that bird again. The goose bit her apron string. I said against, not about. Maud snapped. They spent the next 3 days turning ruin into shelter. Clara slept very little. At night, when everyone else curled beneath patched blankets, she walked the mill floor and counted what they had. 7 sacks of barley, given secretly by a shepherd. 2 sacks of rye from a widow whose sons had left for the coast. A chest of dried apples. 4 cheeses. 1 copper pot. 1 angry goose. 49 people after another washerwoman arrived with her mother and 3 daughters. No formal protection. No recognized pack. No right to grind grain if Aldrich's men blocked the road. She also counted what they could do. Maud could organize work faster than a captain. Bess could make 1 loaf feed for her without making anyone feel poor. Tomas could coax numbers into obedience. Nella could charm secrets out of adults by looking harmless, which she absolutely was not. The widows could set snares, mend roofs, and frighten lazy boys into virtue. Clara herself could soothe a fever, cook for 50, read contracts, throw a pot with accuracy, and keep smiling until a cruel man stepped close enough for the pot to matter. On the 4th morning, the first Greyfin wagon arrived at the South Bridge. It was not full of mercy. It carried 3 guards, 1 clerk, and Aldrich himself. He came dressed in dark green velvet, his blonde curls brushed loose, his sword at his hip. He looked like every maiden's painted idea of an alpha until he opened his mouth. You have made your point, he said. Clara stood on the mill steps with flour on her cheek, and her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Behind her, the new household pretended not to listen and failed with enthusiasm. Have I, she said. Good. I was afraid the goose had taken the clearer lines. Aldrich glanced at Honor, who stood on a sack of barley and watched him with devotional dislike. You embarrassed me, he said. Clara waited for the rest. There was no rest. The whole sentence, the whole man, sat there in the morning air. She clasped her hands. A tragedy. His jaw tightened. You can return. Not as Luna. That is ended. But I will permit you to manage the lower kitchens. The others may return if they swear obedience and pay a fine. Maud muttered something about where he might store the fine. Clara heard it. Aldrich did not, which was fortunate for him and disappointing for Art. No, Clara said. Aldrich blinked. No, it is a short word. I can find a smaller one if you need practice. Someone inside the mill made a choking sound. His eyes cooled. You think this makes you powerful? No. I think bread makes people less dead. That is our present focus. You have no mill, right? This mill belonged to the common tithe before your grandfather seized the toll road. That claim died with the old charter. Tomas appeared in the doorway, holding up a parchment with trembling hands. Actually, my lord, the old charter was copied into Chapel Record 38. I have the copy. It grants emergency grinding rights when winter stores fall below 1 month. Aldrich turned slowly toward him. Tomas turned the color of boiled turnip but did not lower the parchment. Clara could have kissed his anxious forehead. Aldrich stepped closer. You are all still mine. Something hot and clean moved through Clara. She came down 1 step. The wind lifted strands of her blonde hair from the braid and blew them around her face. She was not tall, not broad, not born to terrify soldiers, but every woman behind her had been called someone's burden, someone's servant, someone's leftover, and she had no patience left for ownership. No, she said again. We are not. Aldrich reached for her wrist. The movement was quick, possessive, familiar enough to make old obedience rise in her bones. Clara lifted the copper flour scoop from the step and struck his hand. Not hard enough to break anything. Hard enough to make a beautiful ringing note and cause the alpha of Greyfin to yelp. Honor applauded by flapping. Do not touch me, because you forgot I can move, Clara said. The guard stared. Aldrich stared too, stunned less by pain than by the fact that pain had happened to him. Then from the bridge came a low male voice. Is this the rebellion? Everyone turned. The rider at the bridge sat a black warhorse as if he and the animal had been carved from the same storm. He wore a dark travel cloak fastened with a plain silver clasp, A black leather doublet worked with subtle wolf marks, and no crown, yet the air around him informed every sensible person that crowns were only jewelry. He was young. Not boyish, never that, but in the full power of a man near 30, with midnight dark hair swept back by wind, a hard-cut jaw, and eyes like winter sea glass. He was the most beautiful man Clara had ever seen, which annoyed her because she had no room in her mourning for beauty arriving armed. For riders waited behind him. One carried the blackthorn banner of the Northern Crown. Bess whispered, "Oh, mercy." Tomas made a small sound and hid half behind the door. Albrecht straightened so fast his injured hand twitched. "Your Majesty." King Rowan Thorn dismounted. He was enormous, easily a head taller than every man there, and moved with the contained grace of a wolf that knew it did not need to hurry. At 210 centimeters, he made the bridge look smaller. He removed one glove finger by finger, while looking from Aldrich's reddened hand to Clara's flour scoop to Honor on the barley sack. Honor looked back. The king said, "Reports said a rejected woman gathered servants, seized a mill, and raised a white beast as a war standard." Clara's lips parted. Behind her, Nella whispered, "That sounds better than what happened." The king's gaze flicked to the child, then back to Clara. A trace of something almost like amusement touched his mouth and vanished. "Are you Clara Whitmore?" he asked. "Yes." "Are you leading an armed revolt?" Clara looked down at the flour scoop in her hand. She looked at Maud's copper pot. She looked at Bess, who held a rolling pin, and was trying to seem innocent despite having the face of a woman who could flatten a man and still make pastry. "Not yet," Clara said. Silence. Then one of the king's riders coughed into his fist in a manner that suggested great emotional effort. King Rowan's eyes remained on Clara. They were not kind eyes. They were too watchful for that. But they did not slide over her flower, her rolled sleeves, her rejected status, or the women behind her as if those things made her invisible. That was dangerous. Being seen clearly by a powerful man was either the beginning of rescue or a more elegant form of trouble. Honor hopped down from the barley sack and charged the king. "Honor," Clara warned. The goose ignored her. It crossed the yard in a white fury, wings lifted, beak open. The king's guards reached for swords. "Do not," Rowan said. The guards froze. The goose hit his boot, bit the polished leather, and tried to drag him toward the stream. The king looked down. The goose pulled. No one breathed. Then Rowan Thorn, battle king of the northern passes, conqueror of the Redfin raiders, terror of lawless packs, lifted his bitten boot a few inches and said very calmly, "Madam, your war standard has declared terms." Clara covered her mouth. It did not help. The laugh burst through her fingers, bright and helpless. She expected offense. Kings were not usually tolerant of women laughing while their footwear was under attack. But Rowan looked up at the sound. For one suspended moment, his gaze touched her mouth. Not her status. Not the mill. Her mouth. Heat climbed Clara's throat. She dropped her hand and remembered, with effort, that she had been rejected less than a week ago and was currently suspected of treason by the most handsome man in the kingdom. "Honor," she said firmly, "release His Majesty unless you intend to marry him. And I warn you, crowns require dusting." The goose released the boot. The king's left eyebrow rose. Honor. It seemed aspirational. For the goose. For everyone near him. Rowan looked at the goose, then at Clara. Does it work? On good days, he bites liars. Aldrich gave a sharp laugh. "Your Majesty, you see what nonsense this is. The woman is charming, certainly, but she has no authority. She has gathered frightened dependents by sentiment and kitchen favors. If you return them now, Greyfin will settle the matter quietly." The word quietly moved over the yard like a hand over a candle. Clara saw Maud stiffen. Saw Bess reach backward for Nella without turning. Saw the widows exchange the look of women who had learned that quiet often meant bruises hidden under sleeves. The king saw something too. His posture did not change, yet the air chilled. "Settle how?" he asked. Aldrich smiled. "Fines. Labor duties. Correction where needed." Honor hissed. Rowan turned to Clara. "Did he correct you?" The question was quiet. It could have humiliated her if asked with pity. It did not. It landed like a blade offered hilt first. Clara held his gaze. "He tried once." Aldrich's face darkened. "That was a private matter. He found me giving broth to a stable boy who had taken fever," Clara said. "He said Aluna must learn not to lower herself. He took my wrist. I poured the broth into his lap. It was onion broth, which I regret only because onions deserved a better end." The king's rider, who had coughed before now, turned his horse away, and shook silently. Rowan did not smile. That made Clara like him more than she wished. I will inspect the mill, he said. Aldrich protested. Your Majesty, surely my word as Alpha of Greyfin is enough. No. It was the same short word Clara had used, but in Rowan's mouth it became a closed iron gate. Clara should not have felt pleasure at that. She did. The king walked past Aldrich, and the women parted. Not because he demanded it. Because he did not. He waited for space, ducked beneath the low lintel, and entered the mill. Inside, the air smelled of flour dust, wet wood, apples, and fear trying to become courage. Rowan looked at everything. The patch sacks. The sleeping pallets. The list of grain shares Clara had pinned to the wall. The children's washing line. The repaired chute. The cracked wool plan Tomas had drawn in charcoal. His gaze stopped on the smallest corner, where Nella had arranged 6 chipped cups on a board and placed a wildflower in each. Who made this? He asked. Nella lifted her hand halfway. It is not stolen, she said quickly. Rowan crouched so he was not towering over her. Even crouched, he looked large enough to move beams with his shoulders. I did not ask that. Nella considered him. I made it because ladies need cups when they have councils. Are you a lady? She looked at Clara. Clara's heart squeezed. I am practicing, Nella said. Rowan nodded solemnly. Then your counsel is ahead of mine. The child's grin returned, fierce as sunrise. Clara turned away before her face betrayed her. She busied herself with a grain ledger and nearly knocked over an inkpot. The king caught it before it fell. His hand closed over hers around the little bottle. His fingers were warm, strong, calloused in a way Aldrich's had never been. The contact lasted only a heartbeat, perhaps 2, but Clara felt it up her arm as if her skin had become moon water. Rowan looked down at their hands. She looked too. Flour dust streaked his knuckles where they touched her. He released the inkpot slowly, not reluctantly, slowly enough that she noticed the difference. You have flour on your cheek, he said. She lifted her free hand to wipe it. Other side. She tried again. His mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one with better manners. May I? The question should have been ordinary. It was not. A king asking permission for a touch turned the crowded mill into a room with only 2 heartbeats. Clara nodded. Rowan raised his hand and brushed flour from the corner of her mouth with his thumb. His thumb lingered less than propriety and more than accident. Clara forgot the English language, the laws of grain, and possibly her own knees. Behind them, Honor honked once from the doorway. Clara stepped back so fast her braid swung. Thank you, she said. It was a difficult operation, Rowan replied. The flour resisted. She stared at him. Was that a joke? The king of the northern passes had made a joke so dry it needed butter. Nella giggled. Maud whispered, he will do. Clara wished the floor would open politely. By evening, Rowan had heard every account separately. He spoke to children, widows, servants, Tomas, Maud, Bess, and finally Seraphine, who arrived in a pearl-trimmed cloak with 2 maids and no shawl. Clara saw her from the mill window and felt the old sting. Seraphine was dark-haired, lovely, and smooth as cream poured over a knife. She had the training Clara had always been told she lacked. She stood beside Aldrich with one gloved hand on his arm, the very image of a proper Luna candidate. Then Honor appeared from under the wagon, and Seraphine climbed onto a stump with a shriek. The image suffered. Get that creature away from me, Seraphine cried. Clara stepped outside. He responds poorly to Pearl-based provocation. Seraphine's eyes flashed. You think this is funny? Increasingly, Rowan stood near the well, listening. Seraphine lowered her voice into something wounded and pretty. Your Majesty, she has bewitched the common women against Greyfin. She was always restless, always sneaking beyond her place. We tried to help her, but she sought attention from men in cottages and stables. The yard went still. The accusation was shaped carefully enough to ruin a woman without using one direct word. Clara felt heat leave her face. She knew at once what Seraphine meant. Not because it was true, but because it had been prepared. Every broth she carried, every fever bed she sat beside, every hand she took in kindness could be turned into dirt by a woman with clean gloves. Aldrich looked away. Coward, Clara thought. The word rang clean. Rowan looked at Seraphine. Name one man. Seraphine blinked. Your Majesty. Name one. It is not fitting to repeat lower gossip in detail. You began. Seraphine's mouth tightened. Elder Rowan stepped in. The lady speaks of a pattern. Honor waddled to the elder and stared at his beard. The king said, "A pattern without a thread is fog." Clara's hands curled at her sides. She could defend herself. She knew that. She had defended herself for years in rooms where politeness was used like rope. But before she could speak, Bess stepped forward. "She sat with my husband when lung fever took him," Bess said. "If that is the sort of attention meant, then yes, she gave it, and he died holding a clean cloth because of her." Maud stepped forward too. "She stitched my girl's hand after the loom cut it. If any man mistook that for sin, he was a bigger fool than his breeches promised." Tomas swallowed audibly, then raised one trembling finger. "She once visited me in the mill office." Aldrich seized on it. "There." Tomas continued, voice shaking but clear, "to ask why the grain account showed 300 measures missing. I fainted because I had not eaten. She gave me cheese. That was the full scandal." Nella ran to Clara and wrapped both arms around her waist. "She taught us letters. The letter S looks like a snake if you are tired." Clara touched the child's hair. Her throat ached. Rowan's gaze remained on Seraphine, but Clara felt the force of his attention shift. He had not rescued her by speaking over her. He had made room for truth and let her people fill it. It was a different kind of power. Seraphine climbed down from the stump, cheeks flushed. For a second her beautiful mask slipped, and Clara saw fear there. Not only anger. Fear. "You do not understand," Seraphine said too softly for most. Clara heard. That night, Rowan stayed at the mill. Not inside among the women and children. He made camp with his riders by the South Bridge, close enough to warn danger, and far enough not to make the women feel watched. It was so perfectly judged that Clara found it irritating. Men should not be allowed to be handsome, powerful, and considerate all in one day. It confused the moral weather. She brought broth to the bridge at moonrise because she was not a savage, and because she wanted to know why he had truly come. He stood without cloak, sleeves rolled, helping one of his men mend a saddle strap. Firelight moved over the dark planes of his face. His hair was black, thick, and wind-disturbed. The plain black and silver of his clothes made every noble ribbon Clara had ever seen look like overconfidence. He saw her and took the pot before she could ask. "You should be resting," he said. "Kings first, then people who make annoying observations. Then I am fortunate to be first. You admit the observation was annoying? I admit nothing without witnesses." She looked at his riders. They all became fascinated by the road. Clara ladled broth into a cup and handed it to him. "Why are you here?" "Famine reports." "Greyfin sent reports?" "No." "Greyfin sent polished letters about abundance. 3 villages sent bone charms. Bone charms were old border pleas. A carved bone tied in red thread meant hunger, danger, and no faith in local lords." Clara's stomach tightened. "How many villages?" 3 confirmed. "Perhaps more." Aldrich said stores were low because last harvest failed. Rowan drank the broth. His eyes stayed on her over the rim. "Did it? Rain damaged barley. Rye was strong. Oh, it's fair. Apples excellent. There should be strain, not famine. You know, harvest yields. I know what comes into kitchens. That may be more useful." The compliment landed gently, without decoration. Clara did not know what to do with it. Honor waddled from the dark and settled beside Rowan's boot. The king looked down. "We meet again." The goose nipped at his trouser hem, then rested its head on his boot as if claiming conquered land. Clara stared. "That is new. Am I blessed? Possibly doomed. I have survived worse welcomes. From geese. From dukes. The geese are more honest." She laughed. He watched her again, that focused look that warmed her skin and unsettled her balance. "Do you laugh often?" he asked. "Not lately. You should." "Is that a royal command?" "No. A selfish wish." The words were quiet. Too quiet to be heard by the riders. The bridge, the fire, the sleeping mill behind them, all seemed to lean away and leave Clara standing in the heat of his honesty. She should have stepped back. Instead, she said, "Why selfish?" Rowan's gaze dropped to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. "Because I find I like being near it." Clara's pulse stumbled. Honor chose that moment to release a thunderous honk directly into the king's shin. Rowan looked down. "Your guardian objects." Clara found her voice by miracle. "He objects to many things. Buckles. Bad hymns. Turnips cut too large. And me?" The goose tucked its head under one wing while still sitting on Rowan's boot. Apparently, Clara said, he has decided you are furniture. The king's smile arrived slowly. It changed his face from magnificent to devastating. Clara nearly dropped the ladle. The next week became work. Real work leaves less room for despair than people think. The mill well had to be braced. The stream gate had to be cleared. Grain had to be found beyond Grayfin's toll. Children had to be fed, soothed, washed, and prevented from putting frogs in flour bins. The women needed sleep in turns. The men who came asking for work needed rules, because Clara had not left one master to collect 7 smaller ones. Her first rule was simple. No person ate last every day. The second rule was shorter. No one raised a hand in anger. The third rule had been added after Honor swallowed a silver button from a visiting carter. No shiny payment within goose reach. Tomas wrote the rules in careful letters and pinned them to the mill door. By the second week, others began arriving. A potter woman with 2 sons and a donkey. 3 shepherd girls. A retired soldier with 1 arm who could mend anything with wire and curses. A midwife accused of taking too much authority because babies kept listening to her. A brewer's widow whose ale was strong enough to make grief sit down. They came quietly at first, carrying bedrolls and shame they did not deserve. Clara greeted everyone at the door. If you can work, we will find work. If you cannot, we will find food. If you lie, the goose will know. Honor stood beside her looking holy and threatening. Most people laughed. No one lied twice. Rowan did not remain openly, but his riders came and went. They brought no royal decree. Only nails, salt, axle grease, and once, to Clara's astonishment, 3 bolts of undyed wool. From the king, she asked the rider. From a man who denies owning wool, the rider said. Maud touched the cloth. Fine weave. Bess grinned. He is courting the mill. Clara lifted one brow. The mill is flattered. Is the mill blushing? The mill has been near the oven. That evening, Rowan himself returned with rain in his hair and mud on his boots. Clara found him in the stable shed, attempting to feed Honor from a bowl of chopped greens. The goose stood 3 feet away and watched with the sternness of a judge considering a confession. You are doing it wrong, Clara said. The king did not turn. I suspected. He dislikes being bribed directly. It insults his sense of drama. How does one bribe a goose indirectly? Leave the bowl and pretend the contents are forbidden. Rowan set the bowl down and stepped back. Honor immediately attacked the greens. The king looked at Clara. This creature would have made an excellent diplomat. He has started 3 fights and ended 4. Efficient. Rain tapped the shed roof. The horses shifted in warm shadows. Clara's braid was damp, loose strands clinging to her cheeks. Rowan removed his cloak and held it out. She hesitated. It is only cloth, he said. Nothing near you is only anything. The words escaped before she could catch them. His eyes darkened, not with anger, with attention sharpened into something more dangerous. He stepped closer, the cloak still in his hands. Clara. Her name and his voice had weight, warmth, a private claim he had not yet earned and somehow already carried. Your Majesty, she whispered, because teasing was safer than wanting. Rowan, he said. Outside, thunder rolled over the fields. He settled the cloak around her shoulders. His hands brushed the sides of her neck as he drew the fabric forward. Clara's breath caught. He was close enough that she could see rain caught in his lashes, close enough that the scent of storm leather and pine smoke surrounded her. You should not look at me like that, she said. How am I looking? As if you are deciding whether to conquer something. His voice lowered. I'm deciding whether I am allowed to want something. The shed seemed to shrink. Her fingers closed around the cloak edge. Kings ask themselves that. This one does. Clara's laugh came softly, not because anything was funny, but because feeling this alive frightened her. I was rejected last week. I know. By a man everyone said was my fate. He is not. The certainty of it struck deeper than comfort. You sound very sure. Rowan lifted one hand, stopped before touching her face, and waited. She leaned the smallest distance into his palm. His thumb traced along her cheekbone. I'm sure of what I saw, he said. A man threw away a crown because he mistook it for an apron. Clara swallowed. No one had ever called her a crown. From the corner, Honor sneezed into the greens. Clara closed her eyes. He has exquisite timing. Rowan's soft laugh moved through her like fire under winter cloth. He stepped back first, which made her trust him more and want to throw something at him for it. There is more, he said. The warmth in her chest cooled. About the famine. My men found wagons moving grain north at night. Grayfin markings scraped away. Aldrich, perhaps, or someone using him. Clara thought of Elder Rowan's beard, the missing measures in Tomas's account, and Seraphine's fear under her polished face. The east storehouse, she said. It has old lower doors behind the smokehouse. If wagons moved unseen, they used that road. Can you prove it? Not by sneaking like a minstrel in a bad cloak, if that is what you mean. Rowan looked almost disappointed. Were you hoping to sneak? I have a black cloak. Everyone expects kings in black cloaks. You would be the least sneaky object in the county. What do you suggest? Clara smiled. It was the pudding smile. 3 nights later, Grayfin Manor held its Harvest Mercy Feast. The name was an insult, since no mercy had been invited. Aldrich and the elders arranged the feast to show the king that Grayfin remained prosperous, loyal, and entirely untroubled by women with mills. Nobles from nearby manors arrived in velvet and fur. Musicians played beneath the antler beams. Servants carried platters that should not have existed if the pack was truly hungry. Clara entered through the kitchen door. She wore a gown made from the undyed wool Rowan denied owning, dyed by Maud in a deep blue wash, and fitted by the seamstress who had fled Grayfin with 3 needles hidden in her hair. It was simple compared with a noble lady's heavy gowns, but it shaped her waist, moved like water at her ankles, and left her arms free. Her blonde hair fell loose down her back, brushed until it shone, threaded with tiny glass beads Nella had found in a broken rosary box. Around her throat hung one moonstone. In her hand she carried a cover dish. Behind her walked Bess, Maud, Tomas, and the brewer's widow, all carrying dishes. Honor waddled last, wearing a blue ribbon that he had already tried to murder twice. The kitchen servants stared. One whispered, "You cannot be here." Clara winked. Good. Then no one will expect us. She had not come to steal ledgers. Ledgers could be hidden, burned, explained. She had come to make hunger visible in a hall full of people paid not to see it. When the great doors opened and the first dishes were carried out, murmurs rose. The nobles expected roasted swan, glazed carrots, white bread, sugared apples. They received turnip broth, barley crusts, and one dramatic platter holding a single radish under a silver dome. The radish was very small. It lay there with almost unbearable dignity. Lord Brannock, the fattest of the grain elders, and the man Clara privately suspected of selling stores, stared at it. What is this? Clara stepped forward and curtsied. The mercy feast, my lord. We have prepared it according to the portions recorded for the lower cottages. A dangerous silence fell. Aldrich rose from the high table. Clara. Rowan sat beside him, expression unreadable. He wore black, of course, and looked as if every candle had signed an agreement to favor his face. Seraphine sat on Aldrich's other side, pearls at her throat, hands folded too tightly. Lord Brannock jabbed a finger at the radish. This is mockery. No, my lord, Clara said. Mockery would include garnish. Someone at a lower table snorted. Maud set down a pot of thin broth before the visiting ladies. Bess placed barley crusts with the delicacy of a jeweler arranging diamonds. Tomas, red-faced but resolute, handed copies of ration counts to the royal clerk. Elder Rowan pushed back his chair. This woman disrupts lawful order. Honor waddled beneath the high table. Clara saw the goose disappear behind Seraphine's skirts and prayed, not for mercy, but for aim. The king spoke. Let her finish. Aldrich's jaw worked. Clara lifted her voice. Grayfin reports abundance to the crown while cottages receive half measure. The mill toll doubles after dusk. Orphans are counted as fed when they are given water with flour stirred in. Winter socks are recorded as delivered to households where children still wrap feet in sacking. If this is prosperity, my lords, I fear famine may be overdressed. The visiting nobles whispered. Lord Brannock stood, wine darkening his cheeks. Lies. Sentimental lies from a rejected woman. Honor emerged from under the table with something clamped in his beak. It was not a pearl shawl this time. It was a ring of iron keys. Seraphine went white. Lord Brannock stopped breathing for a noticeable period. Clara stared at the keys. Then she looked at Seraphine. For a moment, the other woman looked young. Cornered. Furious with fear rather than pride. Rowan stood. The hall seemed to lower its head around him. Whose keys? He asked. No one answered. Honor carried them to Clara and dropped them at her feet. Attached to the ring was a strip of red silk from Seraphine's undersleeve. Aldrich turned on Seraphine. "What have you done?" She flinched. Not from guilt alone, Clara saw. From habit. From being blamed by a man who had promised to raise her and would abandon her to save himself. Clara did not like Seraphine. At that moment, she understood her. Lord Brannock moved suddenly toward the side door. Maud stuck out one foot. The elder tripped with a sound like a dropped ham and fell forward into the platter of turnip broth. The broth was not hot enough to burn, only warm enough to baptize his beard in humiliation. Honor, inspired, flapped onto the high table. Ladies screamed. The Duke stood on a bench. The small radish rolled into Aldrich's lap. Rowan's guard seized Brannock before he could rise. Clara picked up the key ring. Her fingers brushed the red silk. Seraphine whispered, "I can explain." "Then do," Clara said. The hall expected accusation. They leaned toward it, hungry for a beautiful woman's fall. Seraphine looked from Aldrich to Brannock to the king. Her chin trembled once. Then something in her hardened. "My father's debts were bought by Lord Brannock," she said. "He said if I took the Luna seat, I could protect my sisters. He said Aldrich already wished it. He told me to keep the lower store keys hidden until the crown inspection passed." Aldrich snapped. "You lying little fool." Honor hurled the radish at him. It struck Aldrich in the chest and bounced into his wine. The whole lower end of the hall exploded in laughter before anyone could stop it. Rowan did not laugh. His eyes were on Aldrich, and what lived there was cold enough to freeze a river. "Did you know?" the king asked. Aldrich looked around the hall. He calculated. Clara could see it. He had always calculated when kindness cost him nothing and abandoned sums when they involved courage. "I trusted my elders," he said. Clara felt tired suddenly. Not sad. Not heartbroken. Only tired in the way one becomes tired of a cracked cup after cutting one's lip on it for years. Rowan looked to the royal clerk. "Seal the East storehouse. Arrest Brannock. Detain Elder Rowan. Aldrich Vale will remain under crown watch until accounts are read." Brannock sputtered through turnip broth. "You cannot shame me before common women." Maud leaned down as guards hauled him up. "My lord, common women have been shaming you privately for years. We are relieved to see the crown catch up." Bess laughed so hard she had to hold the table. Seraphine swayed. Clara moved before thinking and caught her elbow. The other woman stared at her. "Why?" Seraphine whispered. Clara looked at the torn silk on the key ring, the pearls at Seraphine's throat, the fear beneath her powder. "Because falling in public is unpleasant," Clara said. "And because I know who arranged the floor." Seraphine's eyes filled. Not prettily. Real tears made her nose redden. For the first time, Clara liked her better. The storehouse opened before dawn. What they found ended Greyfin's lies. Sacks upon sacks of rye and oats stood behind false partitions. Barrels of dried apples, smoked fish, and beans had been marked for sale beyond the border. 3 wagons stood ready under canvas. The lower cottages had been starved while wealth waited in the dark for better prices. Clara walked through the storehouse with a lantern and felt each shadow strike her like a child's thin wrist. Rowan walked beside her. He had said little since the feast. His anger was not loud. It was worse than loud. It moved with purpose. "I should have found this sooner," Clara said. "You were not given keys. I knew enough to suspect. Suspicion is not a ladder through stone. No, but I could have done more." He stopped near a stack of barley and turned toward her. "You gathered the hungry, opened a mill, exposed the theft, and made half the nobility eat a radish of judgment. What more did you plan before breakfast?" The laugh escaped her, unwilling but real. He stepped closer. "There it is." She looked up at him. The lantern light carved gold along his cheekbones. In this dim place of stolen food, he looked less like a tale and more like a man with weariness beneath his strength. "Do you ever laugh?" she asked. "Sometimes." "At what?" "Bad strategies. Proud men slipping. Geese attacking official footwear. A rich life. It has improved lately. The air between them changed again." Clara knew she should ask about grain distribution, arrest, charters. Practical things. Safe things. Instead, she stood near him with a lantern between their bodies and watched his gaze lower to the moonstone at her throat. "This suits you," he said. "It was from the chapel box." "Borrowed." "No." His fingers lifted the stone gently, not touching her skin, and yet she felt the motion as if he had. "Being seen," he said. Her breath caught. Behind them, someone cleared a throat. Tomas stood at the storehouse door, eyes wide, face scarlet. I brought the account slate. I can come back in an hour. Or winter. Clara stepped away, so fast the lantern swung. Rowan, traitorously calm, said, "Now is fine." Tomas looked relieved and devastated. Honor entered behind him, climbed onto a grain sack, and sat as if presiding over court. Clara pointed at the goose. "He cannot come to every council." The goose tucked both feet under himself and looked permanent. Rowan said, "I fear he already has tenure." By mid-morning, the grain was moving. Not to noble pantries. To cottages, orphan rooms, widow houses, shepherd shelters, and the South Mill. The Crown Guards oversaw measures. Tomas recorded names. Best organized baking ovens in 3 villages. Maud put every idle noble servant to work with such authority that one young lord carried bean sacks for an hour before realizing no one had asked his rank. The sight stirred something dangerous and wonderful. People who had bent their shoulders for years stood straighter. They did not become saints. By noon, 2 women argued over oven order. A shepherd accused a cooper of short measure. 3 boys tried to ride an empty barrel downhill, and Honor stole a nobleman's glove and buried it in a turnip patch. But they argued as people who expected tomorrow. That mattered. Aldrich came to the South Mill on the 3rd day after the storehouse opened. He came alone, which was either bravery or lack of available friends. Clara was in the yard helping Nella thread blue glass beads onto cord for the younger children. The little girl had declared that if the nobles had jewels, the mill girls should have sky necklaces. The cords were crooked, the beads uneven, and every child who received one looked as if crowned. Aldrich stopped at the gate. He looked less polished. Still handsome in the old shallow way, but without the crowd's admiration he seemed thinner, like a painted door with no room behind it. "Clara," he said. Nella immediately stood and picked up a wooden spoon. Clara touched her shoulder. "It is all right. I can aim for the nose," Nella whispered. A comforting thought. Clara walked to the gate but did not open it. Aldrich held a wreath of pale flowers. Honor, asleep near the well, opened one eye. "I have come to apologize," Aldrich said. The old Clara would have helped him. She would have stepped across the awkwardness, supplied the words he lacked, made his apology easier for him. The new Clara waited. He shifted. "I was misled by Brannock and elders. I see now that your qualities were always useful. Useful. Valuable. Like a flower shoot. Do not make this difficult." There he was, not hidden deeply at all. Clara leaned one hand on the gate. "Aldrich, difficult is what happens after easy has been cruel for too long." He flushed. "I can restore you." "To what?" "To my side." The words dropped into the yard and failed to bloom. Clara felt no tug. No ache. Only the faint disbelief one feels when last week's spoiled milk returns claiming to be cream. From behind the wash line, Maud whispered, "Say no loudly." Bess whispered back, "Let her season it." Aldrich held out the wreath. "You were always intended for Grayfin." Honor rose. "That is not a proposal," Clara said. "It is a storage instruction." Aldrich stepped closer. "You think the king will keep looking at you once this is settled? Men like him do not marry rejected women with kitchens full of strays." The words struck where fear already lived. Clara hated that they found any place to land. Then a shadow fell across the gate. Rowan had arrived without trumpet, banner, or mercy. He stood behind Aldrich, black cloak moving in the wind, eyes fixed on a man at Clara's gate. "Men like me," Rowan said, "prefer women who build kingdoms from kitchens while fools misplace them." Aldrich went pale. Clara's heart kicked once hard. Rowan did not look at her yet. All his attention remained on Aldrich, and something possessive, dark, and controlled moved through him like a wolf behind a door. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said stiffly. "This is private." "No," Rowan said. "A gate is a boundary. You are outside it." Honor advanced. Aldrich looked down at the goose and back at Clara. "Call off your bird." Clara folded her arms. "He is not a bird when offended. He is a weather event." Honor seized the flower wreath. Aldrich held on. This was unwise. The goose pulled. Aldrich pulled back. For 5 glorious seconds, the former alpha of Grayfin engaged in a formal contest with a white goose over a wreath of apology flowers. Then the wreath snapped. Honor dragged half through the mud, flapping triumphantly. Aldrich stumbled backward and landed seated in a shallow puddle left by the wash water. The yard erupted. Even Rowan's mouth twitched. Clara did not laugh at first. She watched Aldrich sit there, wet, furious, humiliated by the very common life he had despised. Then laughter rose in her, not cruel exactly, but free. It rang across the yard. Aldrich stood with mud on his fine coat. "You will regret this." Clara opened the gate. For a moment everyone tensed. She stepped through until she stood close enough for him to hear her without the crowd. "No," she said softly. "I regret staying after the onion broth. I regret smoothing your temper so others would not suffer it. I regret mistaking being chosen for being cherished. But I will not regret this." He looked at her then as if finally seeing the door close. She stepped back inside and shut the gate. Rowan watched her, his expression unreadable to everyone else. To Clara, it felt like standing near a hearth. That evening, she found him by the stream. He had removed his gloves and was washing mud from Honor's stolen half-wreath, because apparently kings lost dignity gradually. "You need not clean that," Clara said. "The goose brought it to my boot. That means he likes you or plans to frame you. A common problem in politics." She stood beside him. The stream ran cold and bright over stones. The sky held the soft violet after sunset. Behind them, the mill glowed with lamplight and voices. "Thank you," she said. "For cleaning the wreath? For the gate?" He looked at the water. "I wanted to do worse." The honesty should have alarmed her. Instead it moved through her like a low note. "What stopped you?" "You." "I did not speak." "You had already handled him." Clara watched his hands in the water. Long fingers. Scarred knuckles. Power controlled, not absent. "Were you jealous?" she asked. The question slipped out with more nerve than sense. Rowan went still. The stream chattered over stones. Somewhere behind them, Bess shouted that whoever put a frog in the yeast jar will be answering to Heaven and Maud. Rowan lifted his gaze. Yes. Clara's breath left her. No excuse. No joke. No polite denial. "He was my betrothed," she said, because one of them had to show caution, and it was apparently her turn. "Was. You make small words sound improper. Only when they matter." She stepped closer. "And what do you want, Rowan Thorne?" His eyes darkened again, that winter sea color turning storm deep. "Careful," he said. "That is not an answer. It is the last useful warning I have." Clara's pulse beat in her throat. "I have survived rejection, famine accounts, a badger, and public radish warfare. I may endure an answer." Rowan reached for her slowly enough that she could move away. She did not. His hand settled at her waist, large and warm over the blue wool. Not pulling. Not trapping. Simply there, asking with pressure instead of words. Clara's hand rose to his chest. Beneath her palm, his heart struck steadily. He bent his head until his mouth hovered near her ear. "I want to stand inside your gate," he said. "I want every fool who thinks you can be retrieved to learn fear and grammar. I want to kiss the flower from your mouth and the sharp answers from it too, though I suspect the second task may kill me." Clara's eyes fluttered closed. She had imagined desire as something young girls whispered about, all roses and sighs. This was not that. This was a warm blade, bright and dangerous, cutting away the last cloth around her wanting. "That was very nearly a poem," she whispered. "Do not tell my generals." She laughed, and he moved then, not to her mouth, but to her forehead. His lips pressed there, reverent and restrained. It was not enough. It was perfect because it was not enough. When he lifted his head, Clara gripped his coat. "If you keep being noble," she said, "I may become cross. We cannot have that." He kissed the corner of her mouth. Barely. A spark, not a fire. Her knees considered resigning. A tremendous splash shattered the moment. They turned. Honor stood in the stream with a ruined wreath around his neck, beating both wings while Nella and 3 boys cheered from the bank. Clara rested her forehead against Rowan's chest and shook with laughter. "He is doing it on purpose," Rowan said. "Yes." "Does he interrupt everything?" "Only events he considers under supervised." "Then I shall negotiate visitation hours." "With a goose." "With fate, if necessary." The royal inquiry lasted 12 days. Brannock confessed after 2 nights in a clean cell with no wine, no cushions, and Maud's voice outside explaining to every passerby how much grain his belly represented. Elder Rowan tried to blame dead men, missing clerks, damp ledgers, weather mice, and once, in a burst of desperation, Honor. The royal clerk wrote it all down with visible enjoyment. Seraphine's confession became the most delicate matter. Many wanted her punished with Brannock. She had hidden keys. She had repeated lies. She had worn a shawl and sat in the chair. Clara did not forget any of that. But she also saw the sisters who arrived from Seraphine's father's house. 2 girls of 14 and 16, thin, proud, terrified, with the same dark eyes. They stood behind their sister as if she were a wall that had held too long. Seraphine came to the mill on the 13th morning, wearing a plain gray dress without pearls. The yard fell silent. Honor watched from the well roof, where he had absolutely no business being. Seraphine stopped before Clara and held out the remaining pearls from the torn shawl. "These are yours by repair, right?" she said. Clara looked at the pearls. "That is not a legal term." "It should be." The answer was so unexpected that Clara nearly smiled. Seraphine swallowed. "I said things meant to stain you." They were false. I knew they were false. Every ear in the yard stretched toward them. Clara said nothing. Seraphine's hands trembled. "I thought if I became Luna, my sisters would be safe from my father's debts. I told myself you would only be humbled, not destroyed. That was cowardice wearing perfume." The phrase was too good. Clara's mouth twitched. Seraphine saw it and gave a broken little laugh. "I do not ask you to like me. Wise. But I ask for work." Maud made a noise. Seraphine lifted her chin. "I can read contracts in court French. I can sew, manage correspondence, and make old men believe an idea was theirs if one stands behind their left shoulder." Tomas whispered, "That is useful." Maud glared at him. Clara studied Seraphine. There were easy answers that would satisfy the crowd. Send her away. Make her kneel. Let honor judge her skirts. But Clara was building something, and if it only had room for the blameless, it would be a very small kingdom. "You may work in the ledger room," Clara said. "Under Tomas." Tomas squeaked. Seraphine blinked. "Under him. He faints less now." "I do not faint," Tomas said. "I briefly visit the floor." Nella giggled. Clara continued, "You will write apologies to every cottage where your words traveled. Specific apologies. No scented phrases. No noble fog." Seraphine nodded. "And honor keeps the pearls." The goose immediately launched from the well roof. Everyone shouted at once. Honor landed in a wash basket, seized the pearl string, and waddled away like a duchess leaving scandal. Seraphine stared after him. "Does he always?" "Yes," Clara said. "Whatever the question is, yes." Something shifted after that. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But possibility. Seraphine proved alarming in the ledger room. She found 3 hidden clauses in old toll contracts, corrected Tomas's spelling in a tone that made him blush scarlet, and taught Nella how to insult someone in court French without using any forbidden words. Nella became devoted to her within 2 days. Maud held out for 6, then admitted Seraphine could fold linen corners properly, which for Maud was practically a love song. The mill community grew so quickly that people began calling it Southfold. Clara resisted at first. "We are a mill with ambition," she said. "We are a pack," Maud replied. "Packs require recognition. So do toothaches, yet they arrive." The question of recognition became urgent when nearby nobles complained to the crown. They did not like common women controlling grain shares. They liked even less that runaway dependents from 3 manors had begun sending messages to Southfold asking whether widows could join, whether children could learn letters, whether a woman beaten by her brother could bring 2 goats, and no questions. The Crown Council summoned Clara to Blackmere Keep. The letter arrived sealed in black wax. Clara read it 3 times and felt her courage slip around like a wet shoe. "They will not recognize us," she said. Rowan stood at the mill table, arms folded. He had come to deliver the summons himself, which was unnecessary and therefore noticed by every woman in the room. "They will try not to," he said. "That is not comforting. It was not meant to be." Comfort lies. Preparation helps. Maud nodded. "I like him." Clara looked at her. "Must you announce it?" "Yes." "I am old enough to enjoy myself." Rowan's mouth curved. Clara narrowed her eyes at both of them. Best set a cup of tea before Clara. "What does the council fear?" "Loss of order," Seraphine said from the ledger bench. "Loss of unpaid labor," Tomas corrected, then looked startled by his own boldness. Seraphine patted his arm. "Excellent. Say that in court and then sit before your knees resign. Ne la climbed onto a stool." "Can we bring the goose?" "No," Clara and Rowan said together. Honor outside the window honked. The journey to Blackmere took 2 days. Clara rode in a wagon with Maud, Bess, Nella, Seraphine, Tomas, and enough documents to bury an elder to the chin. Rowan rode beside the wagon for the first mile, then ahead, then beside it again, as if no arrangement satisfied some restless part of him. Honor had been left at Southfold. This lasted until the noon halt, when a white head emerged from a covered basket of turnips. Tomas screamed. Seraphine spilled tea into her lap. Maud said, "I knew he packed himself." Clara shut her eyes. How does a goose pack himself? Nella embraced Honor around the neck. He wanted democracy. Rowan rode back at the commotion and looked from the turnip basket to Clara. "You said no." "I meant it." He disagreed. "I have noticed His Majesty has a talent for hearing only the laws he respects." Rowan glanced at the goose. A dangerous rival. At Blackmere Keep, danger wore stone. The fortress rose from the cliff like the mountain had grown teeth. Banners cracked in the wind. Wolves carved in black granite guarded the gate. Soldiers stared openly as Clara's wagon rolled in with two women, a baker, a former rival, a trembling mill steward, an orphan girl in a sky-bead necklace, and a white goose sitting upright on the driver's bench. Nella waved as if arriving for a holiday. The council chamber was worse than Clara expected. Lords in dark fur. Ladies with jeweled throats and careful faces. Elders from old packs. Crown officers. All arranged in high seats around a floor of black stone, petitioners stood alone. Clara wore a pale silver-blue gown made from Southfold wool, finer now, with fitted sleeves and a long skirt that moved like mist. Seraphine had sewn tiny moon pearls around a neckline, not enough to boast, enough to catch light. Clara's blonde hair fell loose below her hips, brushed bright, held back by narrow braids at the temples. She looked, Maud had said that morning, like a saint who had learned to hit with crockery. Clara stood on the black stone and felt every eye measure whether she belonged. Then Honor waddled out from behind her skirts and sat down. A murmur ran through the chamber. One elderly lord peered over his spectacles. "Is that a goose?" Clara curtsied. "He prefers not to be limited by category." Someone laughed before strangling the sound. The council began badly. Lord Devran of Highmere asked by what ancient blood Clara claimed pack authority. "By none," she said. He looked pleased, as if she had put her neck on the block for convenience. Lady Muriel asked whether servants could form a lawful pack without noble founding. "Hungry people can form a line," Clara replied. "Cold people can form a fire circle. Frightened people can form a watch. We have done all three. If law cannot call that a pack, law should improve its vocabulary." Maud coughed into her hand. It sounded like pride. Another lord asked whether Clara had coerced Greyfin dependents. Bess stepped forward. "My lord, I followed her because my oven had more mercy than my alpha." Tomas produced sign marks from 82 adults. His hands shook so badly Seraphine held the corner of the parchment steady without looking at him. The questioning turned sharper. They asked about taxes, defense, marriage laws, burial rights, grain tolls, wolf oaths, orphan rights, fence repair, midwife licenses, and whether a goose could be considered a weapon. "Depends who is holding the witness list," Clara said before sense could stop her. The chamber laughed. Even Rowan, seated in the king's chair, lowered his gaze for a moment as if composing himself. But laughter did not change votes. Clara could feel the council resisting her. She was too new, too female, too common in her loyalties, too inconvenient. The old packs would rather punish Brannock and Aldrich alone than admit the whole shape of power had cracked. Then the doors opened. A royal guard entered, followed by people. Not nobles. Kitchen women from Blackmere. Stable boys. A chapel widow. 2 soldiers' wives. A line of children from Greyfin and Southfold. The brewer's widow. Shepherds. Potters. Laundresses. Men who had eaten Southfold bread. Women who had sent bone charms. A one-armed soldier carrying a banner made from a flour sack, painted with a crescent moon and a white goose. Clara stared. She had not arranged this. Rowan's expression told her he had not either. Maud's expression suggested she had arranged several things and regretted none. Lord Devran rose. "This is improper." The one-armed soldier looked at him. "So was starving, my lord." "We are all adjusting." People filled the back of the chamber until no more could fit. Lady Muriel said, "This council requires recognized voices." Nella climbed onto the base of a pillar before anyone could stop her. Clara whispered, "Oh no." Nella lifted her chin. "I'm recognized by the soup line." Half the chamber gasped. Honor honked. Nella pointed at Clara. "She found us when people said we were extra mouse. She made letters out of flour on tables." She gave socks that matched when possible. She told us we were not scraps. If that is not Luna Presence, then Luna Presence is silly and should be washed. The silence after that was enormous. Clara pressed one hand to her mouth. Bess cried openly. Seraphine wiped under one eye and pretended not to. Then Maud stepped forward and raised her copper pot. Southfold recognizes Clara Whitmore. Bess raised a bread peel. Southfold recognizes her. Tomas raised his ledger. Southfold recognizes her. Seraphine raised the key ring, now stripped of shame and polished clean. Southfold recognizes her. One by one, people lifted what they had. Spoon, needles, hammers, crutches, bread knives, baby blankets, a shepherd's crook, a child's slate, the flour sack banner. The entire back of the chamber became a forest of ordinary things held like royal swords. Honor seized an old ceremonial cushion from beside the clerk's bench, dragged it across the floor, and climbed onto the council chair reserved for absent dukes. No one moved. The goose sat, chest out, orange beak high. Nella whispered, very loudly, "He is judging." The council broke. Not all at once. Old power rarely collapsed with grace. It creaked, objected, demanded phrasing, tried to form committees, and asked whether the goose needed to be in the record. Rowan stood. The room stilled. The Crown recognizes Southfold as a provisional free pack under Clara Whitmore's leadership, he said. Full charter rights will be reviewed after 1 year, contingent on grain solvency, defense cooperation, and lawful records. Burial rights, mill rights, and orphan protections are effective immediately. Clara could not breathe. A year was not forever. But it was law. It was shelter. It was a door opened wide enough for people to pass through. Lord Devran sputtered. Your Majesty, this is irregular. Rowan's eyes flashed pale. So is a goose in a duke's chair. We are all enduring novelty. The laughter rolled through the chamber like bells. Clara looked at him across the black stone. For once, he did not hide what was in his face. Pride, hunger, a tenderness so fierce it nearly frightened her. The council feast that followed was meant to honor the charter. It also became, because Southfold attended, the first royal feast in memory, where a duchess learned to butter her own bread and a goose slept beneath the king's chair. Clara tried to sit 3 places away from Rowan to keep gossip manageable. This lasted until Rowan looked at the seating clerk and said, no. The clerk moved her place beside the king with the speed of survival. Clara sat, cheeks warm. Subtle, she murmured. I have been subtle for days. You inspected my mill twice in one afternoon. The roof concerned me. You were in the pantry. Pantries often reveal structural truths. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. He leaned slightly closer. You look beautiful. The words were simple. No court polish. No comparison. They entered her without asking permission. I have flour in my hem, she said. Then the hem is fortunate. That was terrible. I am new to compliments that do not involve battle formations. Try again. His gaze traveled over her face, her hair, the moon pearls at her throat, and returned to her eyes. You look like every room has been waiting to deserve you. Clara's breath caught. Then Honor emerged from beneath the table and placed a stolen sausage on her shoe. She looked down. Is this approval? Rowan considered. A dowry. Clara laughed so hard wine nearly came out of her nose. Across the hall, Aldrich watched. He had been permitted to attend under guard, stripped of authority until the Crown decided whether Greyfin could remain under Vale rule. He looked at Clara beside the king, at Southfold laughing together, at Seraphine speaking quietly with Tomas over a folded contract, and Maud instructing a lord on stain removal, as if it were theology. Regret sat on him at last. Clara saw it and felt nothing she expected. Not triumph exactly. Not pity. A calm so wide it seemed to belong to someone older and kinder than she felt. Aldrich approached when the musicians began. Rowan's hand, resting on the table, went still. Clara noticed. Heat and wickedness flickered through her. Clara, Aldrich said, May I have one dance? The old hall held its breath. There it was, the scene every cruel romance wanted. The man who rejected her asking before witnesses. The woman able to wound him with refusal. Clara stood. Rowan looked at her, but did not interfere. Good man, she thought. Annoyingly good. She faced Aldrich. No, the word was not loud. It carried. Aldrich swallowed. I deserve that. Yes. He flinched. She softened only enough not to become him. I hope you become better than what you have been. But you will not practice on me. He bowed his head. As he stepped back, Honor trotted after him, seized the lace of his polished shoe, and tugged. No, Clara whispered. Honor tugged harder. Albert tried to keep walking with dignity. The shoe came off. The former alpha hopped once, then twice, arms windmilling, and landed seated in a basket of fresh rushes prepared for the dancers. The hall erupted. Even Aldrich, after one stunned moment, covered his face and laughed weakly. That laugh, small and humiliated, was the first hopeful thing Clara had heard from him. Seraphine approached him, not fondly, but not cruelly, and offered a hand up. You might begin, she said, by apologizing to the goose. Honor held the shoe hostage under the table. The musicians recovered. Dancing resumed. Rowan stood and offered Clara his hand. May I? You saw what happened to the last man. I will risk footwear. She placed her hand in his. The dance was slow, old, and simple enough that Clara did not disgrace Southfold. Rowan moved with surprising ease for a man built like a fortress. His hand at her waist was firm, warm, and a shade too possessive for public innocence. People are watching, she whispered. Yes, that is your entire answer. I want them to. Her heart leapt. Rowan, he guided her through a turn, bringing her closer than the dance required. I want every lord here to understand that Southfold is under crown protection. Is that all? His eyes lowered to her lips. No. The words struck sparks through her. She should have scolded him. Instead, she let her fingers tighten on his shoulder. You are making me forget steps. Good. Good. If you step on me, I can claim injury and keep you seated beside me all evening. That is a terrible strategy. I said I laugh at bad strategies. I did not say I avoid them. The dance ended with her breathless and half furious. He bowed over her hand and brushed his lips across her knuckles. The touch was courtly. The look he gave her over her hand was not. Clara decided privately that Blackmere Keep had inadequate ventilation. Southfold's first winter began with work so heavy that romance had to steal its moments like a child stealing apples. Rowan could not remain every day. Border disputes required him. Crown courts required him. Men who had never missed a meal required long explanations about why starving workers made poor foundations for a kingdom. But he came whenever he could. Sometimes with soldiers to train Southfold's watch. Sometimes with clerks to repair law. Once with 6 crates of chimney tiles and a face that dared anyone to call them gifts. Clara met him at the gate. Does the roof concern you again? Smoke flow. In the chimney tiles. A grave matter. Your Majesty, are you courting me with masonry? He looked past her to where 3 widows examined the tiles like jewels. Is it working? Clara watched Bess clap both hands to her cheeks in joy over the promise of a better bakehouse chimney. Unfortunately, she said, yes. His smile warmed the cold morning. They had stolen conversations in the mill office, walks by the stream, and one memorable afternoon in the grain loft when Rowan tried to help Clara move sacks and discovered that Honor considered the loft ladder sovereign territory. He cannot block a ladder by law, Rowan said from below. Honor sat on the 3rd rung. Clara, above with her sleeves rolled, looked down. Have you told him? I command armies. Then command him. Rowan looked at the goose. The goose looked back. After a long silence, the king removed a shiny cuff button and placed it on the floor. Honor immediately abandoned the ladder to steal it. Rowan climbed up. Clara folded her arms. You bribed him. Indirectly. You learned. I listen when the teacher is compelling. He reached the loft and stood too close because the space was narrow and because neither of them moved away. Dust floated in gold shafts around them. Below, the mill thumped with life. Clara's back touched a beam. Rowan set one hand beside her head. This is becoming a habit, she said. Being trapped by poultry, standing too close in places where someone may climb up. Do you want me farther? She looked at his mouth. No. That was all the invitation he needed. He kissed her properly then. Slow at first, as if asking a question with every breath. Clara answered with a hand in his dark hair and years of hunger she had not known where to put. He made a low sound that curled through her body. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her close enough that she felt the controlled strength in him and a restraint trembling beneath it. She had been respected before in pieces, for her kindness, her management, her usefulness. This was not only respect. This was chemistry, bright enough to make the world tilt. When they broke apart, Clara's lips tingled and Rowan's composure looked delightfully damaged. I should apologize, he said. Do not dare. Good. He kissed her again. Below, Tomas called, Mistress Clara? Are the barley shares up there? Clara pulled back, eyes wide. Rowan rested his forehead against the beam and whispered something in a northern battle tongue. That sounded sinful, Clara whispered. It was a prayer for patience. You pray aggressively. I feel aggressive. She bit her lip, smiling, and he looked as if patience might lose. Tomas called again. Honor honked from below with the stolen button in his beak. Rowan closed his eyes. I will negotiate with fate later. Trouble returned with the first hard frost. Greyfin's remaining loyalists blocked the north road and seized a grain wagon bound for Southfold. Albert claimed ignorance, but the men wore Old Vale colors and obeyed his cousin, Caddock, a brute with heavy shoulders and a talent for finding smaller people to frighten. Clara rode out with Maud, 2 watchmen, and Rowan's captain, Sir Elian, a cheerful man with a scar across one eyebrow and a rare gift of making danger sound like an errand. They found the wagon at the old toll bridge. Caddock stood beside it with 8 men. No Southfold toll paid, he said. Clara dismounted. Her winter cloak whipped around her legs, and her long blonde hair, braided but wind-loosened, flashed pale against the dark wool. There is no legal toll here. There is if I say there is. That is not law. That is noise with boots. Sir Elian coughed happily. Caddock stepped close. You grew bold under the king's cloak. Clara's skin prickled. He wanted her afraid. He wanted witnesses to see fear and call it order. She smiled. I grew bold under my own apron. The cloak is warmer. He grabbed her arm. Sir Elian moved, but Clara moved first. She drove her knee into Caddock's thigh, not delicate, not ladylike, exactly where Maud had taught the younger women to strike when a large man forgot manners. As he grunted and bent, Clara swung her small satchel up into his face. The satchel contained account weights. Caddock staggered backward, nose unbloody but pride severely injured, and tripped over a sack his own men had dropped. He landed on the frozen road with a crash. Maud raised both fists. That is my girl. The fight might have turned ugly then, but the forest answered with wolves. Not common wolves. Rowan's royal guard emerged from the trees in dark cloaks, silent and already surrounding the bridge. At their head was Rowan himself. His face, we saw Caddock's hand still gripping a torn piece of Clara's sleeve, was something Clara would remember in warm rooms for the rest of her life. The men at the bridge dropped weapons. Caddock tried to rise. Rowan put one boot on the hem of his cloak, pinning it to the road. Caddock choked himself sitting halfway up and fell back with a strangled squawk. Remain, Rowan said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Clara walked to him, wind burning her cheeks. I had it handled. His gaze swept over her torn sleeve, then her face. I saw. You look murderous. I'm editing. Edit further. His jaw flexed. She stepped close enough that only he could hear. I am not harmed. He touched you. The possessiveness in his voice should have made her bristle. It did a little. It also sent a shamefully pleased warmth through her. Yes, she said. And I introduced him to arithmetic. Rowan looked at Caddock, still pinned by cloak and humiliation. Did he learn? Caddock wheezed. Yes. Excellent, Clara said. Education is the soul of civilization. Sir Elian laughed outright. Caddock and his men were made to pull the rescued wagon all the way to Southfold under guard, while children followed at a safe distance chanting toll bridge, pay with pride and pull the load. It was not dignified. It was justice with rhythm. The only true bloodshed was Caddock's pride, and everyone agreed it had been overfed. That night, Southfold held a watch fire. Not a feast. The winter stores were too carefully counted for waste. But Bess made apple cakes small enough for fairness and sweet enough for hope. The brewer's widow opened one cask. Seraphine read the first formal apology letter she had written to the cottages, and Maud admitted it contained only 2 phrases that smelled noble. Clara sat on a log near the fire with Nella tucked against her side. Rowan stood with Sir Elian across the yard, speaking quietly, but his gaze returned to Clara again and again. Nella noticed. He looks at you like honor looks at forbidden buttons, she said. Clara choked on cider. Nella. Like he wants to steal you, but knows someone will shout. You are too young for metaphors. Seraphine taught me. Of course she did. Nella's smile faded. Will he take you away? The fear under the question cut through Clara's laughter. She wrapped an arm around the child. No one takes me anymore. But if you marry him, the word marry landed between them like a coal. Clara looked toward Rowan. He had stopped speaking. Even across the yard, she felt him notice the shape of her attention. Then I will choose what happens, she said. And I will not choose a life where Southfold becomes a place I visit like a polite aunt. Ne la considert. Good. You are better than polite aunts. Thank you. You are more like a queen with soup. Clara kissed the top of her head. Highest praise. Later, after the children slept and the watch changed, Rowan found Clara by the mill door. Walk with me, he said. It was phrased as an invitation, but his voice carried some deep decision. They walked to the old oak above the stream. Frost silvered the grass. The moon made everything look sharper and kinder than day. For a while, neither spoke. Then Rowan said, I leave for the western border at dawn. Clara had expected it. That did not help. How long? 2 weeks if men behave sensibly. A month if they behave as men. She tried to smile. It wavered. He turned to her. Clara, I know you have duties. That is not what I was going to say. She folded her arms against cold and feeling. Then say the worst thing before I invent it. He stepped close. I want to court you before the Crown, the Church, Southfold, Blackmere, and any goose who files objection. Her heart stopped, then returned with poor manners. That was not the worst thing. I'm not finished. Ah. He drew a breath. For the first time since she had known him, Rowan Thorne looked almost uncertain. It undid her more than confidence. I want you as my wife, he said. My Luna. My equal in every hall that fears you, and every kitchen that loves you. I want your counsel where law is made. I want your laughter where I sleep. I want your hand at every gate. But I will not ask you to leave what you built as proof of loving me. Clara's eyes burned. What would that mean? Southfold remains yours. Its charter stands. You appoint a steward when you are away, and you return as often as you choose. If you prefer to remain here and have me come like a very tall inconvenience, I will do so. She laughed through tears. A royal inconvenience, with references, and chimney tiles. Many. She looked up at him. Moonlight traced his dark hair, his beautiful severe face, the restraint he wore like armor. He was not the last card in her hand. She had Southfold, Maud, Bess, Nella, Seraphine, Tomas, the watch, the bakers, the widows, the people who had raised spoons in a royal chamber. She had herself. And because she had herself, she could choose him freely. You are not rescuing me, she said. No. You are joining a very loud household with strict bread rules and a goose who steals buttons. I have considered the risks. You will be bitten. I have been bitten. Emotionally also. I expect so. She smiled, tears slipping at last. Rowan lifted his hand and caught one with his thumb. May I kiss you before I leave? Clara rose on her toes and answered by pulling him down. This kiss held no interrupted question. It was winter fire, fierce and slow, his arms around her, her hands in his hair, the moon above them and Southfold behind them alive with the small sounds of a home she had made. He kissed her like a man remembering restraint by force. She kissed him like a woman done asking permission from old wounds. When they parted, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. Is that yes? He asked. That is courtship, she said, breathless. Ask me again when you return. Cruel woman, practical woman. You may be terrible at letters. I will write daily, legibly. Do not test miracles. A white shape moved from the bushes. Honor waddled into the moonlight, carrying Rowan's missing glove. The king sighed. Clara leaned against him, laughing. The 2 weeks became 3. Rowan's letters arrived every day, but one, and the missing day arrived with 2 letters after a bridge washed out. His handwriting looked like soldiers had marched across the page in bad weather, but the words improved. The first letter described border troop movements and asked whether the chimney tiles set properly. The fourth admitted that a Western duke had presented a speech, so dull Rowan missed honors honking. The seventh said, I saw a woman in a blue cloak from behind, and my heart behaved foolishly before my eyes corrected it. Clara read that line in the mill office and pressed the page to her mouth. Seraphine, at the opposite desk, looked up. If that is grain pricing, it has become intimate. Clara folded the letter. Do your ledgers. Gladly. Numbers are less pink. During Rowan's absence, Southfold faced its own tests. A fever moved through 2 cottages. Clara and the midwife worked 3 nights with vinegar cloths, broth, prayers, and the stern refusal to let fear choose the ending. All lived. A neighboring lord refused to release a widow's goats, claiming debt. Maud led 8 washerwomen to his gate and washed every sheet in his household with blue dye until he reconsidered. Seraphine's sisters joined the schoolroom. The younger one bit a boy who mocked her shoes. Clara made both apologize, then asked Maud to teach the girl better biting standards, by which she meant not at school. Tomas found he could speak in meetings if he held a quill. Nella began calling herself assistant to the assistant of accounts. Honor stole the quill weekly. Southfold became noisy, imperfect, and stubbornly alive. When Rowan returned, snow fell. Clara was in the yard, lifting a basket of kindling when the watch horn sounded. She turned and saw black riders on the road. At their front, Rowan rode bareheaded beneath the falling snow. Dark hair wind swept, black cloak white at the shoulders, eyes fixed on her from the moment the gate came into sight. She set down the basket. She did not run. She walked quickly, which was entirely different and fooled no one. At the gate, he dismounted before his horse fully stopped. For a second, they stood with iron bars between them, smiling like fools. "You returned," she said. "You doubted. I prepared 3 speeches in case. Were they sharp? One involved turnips. Then I am grateful to survive." She opened the gate. He stepped inside. It mattered. They both knew it. Behind Clara, Southfold had gathered. Maud pretended she was there by accident with a broom. Bess wiped her eyes into her apron. Seraphine held Nella's shoulders. Tomas held a ledger upside down. Honor pushed through the crowd, saw Rowan, and charged. Rowan braced. The goose stopped at his boots, dropped a shiny cuff button from its beak, and bowed its head. The yard went silent. Nella whispered, "He approves." Rowan looked at Clara. Snow caught in her long blonde hair and on her lashes. Her cheeks were bright with cold. Her blue wool gown had been mended at the sleeve, and moon pearls shone at her throat. She looked nothing like the humiliated woman on the Moonrise platform, except for the same brave eyes. He went down on one knee in the snow. Clara's breath caught. "Before Southfold," Rowan said, voice carrying. "Before the people who knew your worth before kings did, before the white terror who guards your gate, I ask again. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me, and let me spend my life proving I understand the honor of standing beside you?" No one breathed. Clara looked at Maud, who nodded fiercely. At Bess, who cried harder. At Nella, whose eyes shone. At Seraphine, who smiled with real warmth. At Tomas, who turned the ledger right side up as if that would help history. Then she looked at Rowan. She had once thought being chosen meant waiting for a man to name her place. Now she knew choosing could be mutual, public, and rooted in a life she would never surrender. "Yes," she said. The yard exploded. Rowan rose and Clara met him halfway. The kiss was not court polite. It was joyous, snow-cold, and mouth-warm, his hands lifting her slightly off her feet, her laughter breaking into it because Southfold was cheering and Honor was attacking the hem of Rowan's cloak with festive violence. Maud shouted, "Let the man breathe. He is large but mortal." Bess shouted, "Soup for everyone." Nella shouted, "The goose is a prince now." Honor honked like a trumpet made of judgment. The wedding took place at spring moonrise, not in Greyfin's high hall, but in the meadow between Southfold Mill and the stream. Clara refused a heavy court gown. She wore silver blue silk light enough to move in, with a fitted waist, floating sleeves, and a long train embroidered by the women of Southfold with wheat, moons, little spoons, and one white goose hidden near the hem. Her blonde hair fell below her hips in shining waves, pinned back with moonstones and small pearls. She wore no crown until Nella brought one made of spring flowers, and Ma dared anyone to improve it. Rowan stood beneath the oak in black and silver, impossibly handsome, solemn enough to make half the girls sigh, and one elderly widow declare she might reconsider youth if it returned with better taste. The ceremony was simple. Clara promised partnership, truth, and bread shared before pride. Rowan promised protection without possession, counsel without condescension, and to respect all household rulings involving poultry. Honor interrupted only twice, which everyone agreed showed growth. Aldrich attended. He stood near the back with Seraphine, who had become interim advisor for Greyfin's reforms because life enjoyed irony when properly seasoned. He did not look happy exactly, but he looked awake. When Clara passed him after the vows, he bowed. "Luna," he said. For the first time, the word from his mouth did not try to own her. Clara nodded. "Aldrich." Honor approached him. Aldrich flinched, then bowed lower. "And my Lord Goose." Honor allowed this and did not bite him. Progress, Clara thought, could be absurd and still be real. The feast was held in long tables across the meadow. There was roasted lamb, rye bread, apple cakes, butter carved into moons, and enough turnip broth to make Lord Brannock's memory uncomfortable. Brannock himself was serving his sentence for repairing roads under Maud's distant supervision. Elder Rowan had been assigned to inventory grain for poorhouses, a punishment made sharper by arithmetic. Caddock worked toll-free transport under royal guard and had grown excellent at lifting sacks without commentary. Every villain had met consequence in flesh, sweat, mud, and public inconvenience. No one had needed blood for justice to feel satisfying. As twilight deepened, Clara slipped away from the dancing to the mill door. She found Rowan already there, as if desire had a map. "Hiding?" he asked. "Surveying." From the shadows. "Luna work is mysterious." He leaned one shoulder against the door, towering and beautiful in the gold spill of lamplight. "Queen works soon." She looked at him. The Crown had begun discussions. Southfold's charter had inspired petitions across the borderlands. Rowan wanted her at Blackmere not as decoration but as a voice in law. The thought still frightened her. It also called to the part of her that had once kept lists by candlelight and thought no one saw. "I will still keep the mill office," she said. "I would not dare move your ink. You would lose a finger to Tomas. He has grown fierce." Seraphine taught him court French insults. "Then I fear him." They stood listening to the music. Children chased each other between tables. Maud danced with Sir Elian and pretended she was not enjoying it. Bess fed apple cake to anyone thin, sad, or within reach. Nella sat on Seraphine's lap teaching her flower crown repair. Honor slept in the king's empty chair because power recognized power. Clara felt fullness press against her ribs. Not the brittle fullness of a perfect ending. The living kind. Messy. Loud. Still requiring ledgers tomorrow. Rowan took her hand. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. She thought of the moonrise platform, the pearls snapping, the road filled with footsteps. She thought of hunger, fear, laughter, kisses interrupted by geese, and a gate that had become a boundary instead of a cage. "Yes," she said. His hand tightened. She smiled up at him. "I regret not letting Honor bite Aldrich sooner." Rowan's laugh was low and unguarded. He drew her into his arms. "My fierce Luna, my very tall inconvenience." He kissed her under the mill lintel, away from the crowd, but not away from the life they had chosen. His mouth was warm, sure, and still capable of making her forget the laws of grain. Her hand slid into his dark hair. His arm closed around her waist, possessive in the way she now understood as promise, not prison. When the kiss ended, she rested her cheek against his chest and watched Southfold glow. She was not alone. He was not her last defense. They had a pack made of kitchen smoke, washerwomen's arms, orphan laughter, repaired laws, stubborn bread, second chances, and one moon-marked white goose who had bitten dishonor until it let go. At the far table, Honor woke, opened one black eye, and hopped once toward the moon. The sound echoed over the stream like a ridiculous blessing. Clara laughed, and all around her, the people who had followed when she walked away from shame lifted cups, spoons, bread peels, and hands to the woman they had crowned before any council dared catch up. Follow Moonlit Romance Library for more moonlit romances.